show that's 3 dimensions away from Tim Burton directing a live-action version of A Nightmare Before Christmas. I'm your host, 3D Jake, and today we're looking at Tim Burton's A Nightmare Before Christmas. Nightmare Before Christmas was directed by Henry Selleck, which I know a lot of people misspeculate that it's actually Tim Burton who directed it, when in reality he was actually directing Batman Returns at the time. And when Warner Brothers, because of the success of Batman 89, gave him full creative control over Batman Returns, but Disney, who he knew he wanted Nightmare Before Christmas, said, look, we'll make it, and you get full creative control if you make it. He goes, well, I'm making Batman Returns, but is it okay if I still make it? And they said, yeah, sure. So he got a friend of his that was an animator at Disney, Henry Selleck, who would later go on to make James and the Giant Peach and Coraline, direct this movie. Henry Selleck, who only at the time was an animator at Disney, but then when him and a friend of Tim Burton's, Richard, I think his name Richard Berman, Richard Berman, and Selleck left Disney. Then they went in their own separate ways. Richard went with Tim, and of course Henry went on to do MTV stop motion stuff, and then of course he come to direct Nightmare Before Christmas. And Tim said, "Look, I'm doing Batman Returns. If you want to do Nightmare Before Christmas," and so the movie, of course, stars Chris Sarandon, Danny Elfman, Catherine O'Hara, Paul Rubens, and so many other people I'm forgetting about. The movie is essentially about Jack Skellington, voiced by Chris Sarandon and sung by Danny Elfman. And, of course, discovers, who's sick and tired of Halloween Town. And eventually, when he stumbles across a Christmas tree, goes inside there and discovers that there's a Christmas world. And he wants to try to bring Christmas World. He's sick and tired of Halloween Town all the time. And he wants to bring over Christmas World. And then, of course, he wants to celebrate Christmas. And, of course, he goes through, bringing stuff in there. And then, of course, everyone in town loves this idea. But then, they think, oh, well, Jack wants to be Skeleton. Everybody likes Jack Skellington. So, Jack wants to be Santa Claus. So we'll just go and kidnap Santa Claus and let him be Santa. And that happens. And then, of course, Jack does it, but then he doesn't realize that he doesn't understand what he's doing is wrong. He thought people want to be scared, so at the same time, he's dropping toys of terror rather than dropping, regular toys. And so I think, and then, of course, Santa Claus is being tortured by the Oogie Boogie, which is the boogeyman. And there is a love connection between him and Sally, and she has a crush on him, but she has, an abusive creator. And it's essentially a weird story, and I really enjoy this movie because it's a unique stop motion film. I'm a big I'm a big fan of the idea, the stop motion. I watched a documentary the other day called "The Movies That Made Us," and I've never really liked The Nightmare Before Christmas, but I've appreciated it because it's really hard to make a film. And I watched the documentary on this, and I was like, I learned a lot of things. I did not know, that, of course, they had a guy who wrote Beetlejuice, Michael McDowell, was going to write it, but then he had a cocaine problem. So then Caroline Thompson, who was Danny Elfman's girlfriend at the time, when Danny Elfman was scoring and doing the voice of Jack Skellington, said, hey, they heard Michael McDowell they were only doing songs at the time because the script wasn't done because Michael McDowell was a coke problem. So they're like, well, look, she said, I can write it. And so she went and wrote the script and then turned it in to Henry Selleck and Tim Burton. And they approved it, and she kept doing the pages and stuff. And, they had a script to go around. And so they were making this movie, of course. They were making this movie, and it took forever because they said every stop motion takes forever because every time they have to position them, take a picture, position them, take a picture, position, take a picture. And, and so it takes a while to do that. Which now I'm sure it's much easier because, just on a computer, you could probably do it on a computer in probably 30 minutes. But, at the time, this was we barely even had CGI. So, and I really appreciate the idea of this movie because Tim Burton gets to make his vision. And I know he didn't get to direct it because of Batman Returns. But I really appreciate the fact that, he did get someone else to come in there. And I do like that there's two different visions in this movie because I'm sure if Tim Burton, it probably would have been a slightly different. And I like Henry Selleck. I think he, got to do a unique vision of this. He got to input his ideas too, and if Tim Burton, I'm not saying, you could see with Corpse Bride, and you could see Frankenweenie, like these people were like, well, how come these two never lived up to what A Night Before Christmas? That's because it wasn't directed by, it was directed by, Henry Selleck and not Tim Burton. Versus, and it was two different visions in one, so that means there was different ideas. When Tim was in the writer's block, Henry probably wasn't in a writer's block, but when Henry was in a writer's block, Tim probably wasn't in a writer's block. Tim has ideas, okay, he says this, but when Henry has ideas, he probably says do this, which I know it says they did have, clashes on set. Like Henry, of course, had a different ending where Oogie Boogie and Jack Skeleton battle. Originally, it was supposed to be Sally's abusive creator, but of course Henry liked that idea, and Tim Burton hated the idea. In fact, he kicked the wall in a room. He kicked a hole in the wall because he hated that idea so much, and they stuck with Tim's vision instead. Although I think it's on the Blu-ray and the 4K that you can see. It's on the documentary of the Movies That Made Us, where you can see like the ending that was storyboarded, but they never shot it. They never, stop motioned it because Tim Burton hated the idea so much. And Danny Elfman was supposed to just be the whole entire voice of Jack Skeleton, but because Tim Burton once said, you're Jack, and he went off to make Batman Returns, and then of course, in the recording sessions, they loved him as singing, but they did not like his voice acting. They just felt like he was not like a voice actor. And so they wanted someone that had a stronger voice that could match his. And so they told Tim that, and Tim said, okay, it's fine. And so he had to tell he didn't even tell Danny. He told Danny's girlfriend, Carol, who's the writer of the movie, to tell Danny. And so that's what they did. And of course, Danny Elfman got told that. He was kind of bummed, but he's like, at least I get to sing the songs, in which that songs technically are more important than the movie, because the voice acting is like here and there. Because like when he has a line of dialogue, the line of dialogue is like there's less. I think he has less lines talking than he does singing, because I'm like watching and I'm like, it just seems like they hurry up and get past the talking lines just so they can get back to singing. Because I'm like, I think that's what they did, because they're like, well, we just need some few minutes of talking. Which I'm like, why? If that's the case, then why don't you just keep him lines? Because half the time they're not going to look at his voice; they're just going to listen, But anyway, but they got one of my favorite actors. It was not my. I think he's a great actor, but he's a favorite of mine in one of my favorite movies. Chris Sarandon, who was in Fright Night and Child's Play and Princess Bride. They got him to, because he sounded like Danny Elfman, so they're like, we want you to be Jack Skeleton. So they got him to be Jack Skeleton, which I really appreciated that, because really, it's really hard to, match somebody else's voice. And you could tell, like, there are some times where I could not tell if it was Chris and it was Danny, but then you could tell sometimes that, yeah, that's Chris and that's Danny. Like, at the beginning, I'm like, I couldn't tell, but then there's parts where I'm like, okay, because, when he's talking, you could tell, obviously, okay, when he's not singing, it's Chris. When he is singing, it's Danny. But you could tell, like, when you start talking, introducing Christmas, you're like, oh, okay, that's Danny. All right, that's Chris, And so, and I will say, I really like this movie. There are some things I really like. Like, I really like Christmas World. The Christmas World. I thought that looked beautiful, well made. It just felt like, beautiful and everything. I did like it. Even though you could tell it's a soundstage. You could easily tell, like, just when Jack Skeleton looks, you could tell that's just a giant soundstage. Versus Halloween with the Halloween Town, where you could tell I couldn't even tell it looks like a real world. Like, I just thought that was like, this looks real compared to the other one. And I really do like, like the character designs and the beautiful looks of this place. Like, it just looks creepy and gothic-y. I like the designs, and I think the acting is spot on. I do think the shots and transitionals just looks beautiful. It just looks like something real, and compared to, like, it doesn't just look like it's done on a computer, which nowadays, if it was made, it'd look like it's all on a computer. I think the story, like, I've heard critics like Siskel and Ebert complain that the story was weak. I can see it, because it doesn't feel like, it feels like the story, it just feels like the story, like you're waiting before, because I was like watching it and I'm like, Sally really doesn't talk to him before he goes to Christmas World, and I'm just like, he's just him and his dog walking, and he's kind of depressed, and then he goes into Christmas World, and I'm just like, I thought Sally talked to him. I'm like, are you serious? Like, I said, if I was the screener, I would have probably put Sally in there and just them have a conversation before he goes to Christmas World. But then again, I do feel like that was a writing thing, because they were just trying to hurry up and get to the song in a way. And I feel like some parts of this don't hold up as much, because it does feel like their focus is more on the songs than it is the story itself, which I do feel like that kind of hurts the movie a little bit. But at the same time, I do think that it is really hard to make these movies, and so I understand it was meant to be a musical first and foremost rather than a story. It's like, but I do think that, you know, who knows? Like, if it would Tim Burton would have directed it, it could have maybe been different. Like, but at the same time, because if you look at The Corpse Bride, you could tell that's more of a well established where it needs to know where the songs are, versus where the scenes are. But that one Tim Burton directed, compared to this one, which was Tim Burton did not direct, and Henry Selleck did. And this was the first time director who really, was only did like stop motion for like commercials. And so I really think that, Tim Burton probably would have it probably would have fixed my issues, because I like this one for better than The Corpse Bride, but at the same time, I do feel like there are some issues I have with this movie. But I do think that Jack Skellington, I never had an issue with his storyline. I think going into Christmas World to try to like get someone that wants to try to, it also has a great message of someone that's like, if you're stuck in something, you can always change and have new ideas and new views of expression, because you don't always have to sit there and stay because this is the normal, and it kind of has a creativity of ideas, like for instance, if you're just trying the same food, you say, hey, mix it up, try something else. Or if like you're not happy with yourself, like for instance, if you're just dating someone that you're not happy with, and you'd rather date this type of person, then do that. It's like, it's very like accepting to all. That's what it feels like. It's a very accepting movie. And although some parts are, don't really hold up compared, not like to say like, problematic stuff. I'm saying like hold up as in like, some scenes you're just like it's like, it feels like outdated, like there are some scenes that you're just like like he's on the phone, like when they're on the phone, and you're like, oh, those type of phones don't exist anymore, and just stuff like that, and just, like stuff like that, or you like when they're on like, like the TV, the box TVs and stuff like that, or the VCRs and stuff. And just like, although I do like, when you have the Santa Claus and everything, and when the Santa Claus in the army shooting up at him. It's just that to me, I like that stuff scenes. It's really clever, and it does feel very Tim Burton-esque, but at the same time, you could tell when it feels Tim Burton and when it doesn't feel Tim Burton. And I did really like the documentary. It did really make me appreciate this movie more, in a sense of like how the story, can resonate. Like, a lot of people love this movie. And I know I do have some issues with me. It's just my opinion. I'm sure people say, well, it's a great movie, you're just an idiot. But I'm like, it's just how I feel. I don't love this movie as much as some people, but at the same time, I appreciate this movie for what it is, because I may not love the story. I may feel like the story's weak, but at the same time, I do feel like this is well made, because, for instance, this could have been a piece of shit garbage movie with bad animation, but at the same time, this movie is not. Like, it's not a bad movie, and the story's pretty decent, compared to what we could have gotten. It could have been worse, that Michael McDowell script. It could have been an awful script. Or it could have been, it could have been better. We don't know, because we never read his script. We only read Coraline's script. It's kind of the same idea, principle, because Tim Burton and them had, like, they pitched the idea, and they just had someone write their script into that expands their story. So it still would have been the same story, just probably would have had different scenes and outcomes of different parts, but it would have been the same, like, I think, pretty much outcome of the story. But I do like this movie in a sense of, like, we got this movie when almost we didn't, this is a movie that, people watch around Christmas time. I have a family member that loves this movie. This is one of their favorite movies. And I think this movie is for everyone. It's a very accepting movie of different races or sexualities, because it's like, it's a movie where, if, like, it basically says you can, be like, like the whole idea of Christmas could be a metaphor for, like, if, you're straight, but you didn't want to be gay, and, well, I'm, not straight, I like women, but then, you want to come out. Like, this movie is a very coming out sorts of movie, where you feel like, hey, look, I don't want, I'm into women. That it could be like that type of thing. Like, the Christmas metaphor could be like that, where it's like Jack Skellington is a gay man, but he's pretending to be straight. But once he goes to Christmas, he's gay. That's where he has his coming out moment. That I could see that, because I could see that ideology being, and people love that. People in the LGBT community love this movie, and I could see why, because it feels like it is that metaphor to be accepting. And when he brings in these new ideas and stuff, you know, some people in a town, most people are accepting, but there are some that don't accept this idea because they like Halloween to be dark and gothic. And I like them ideas to how it is almost like you have this, you know, anti-version of Christmas versus this version of Christmas that is accepting. And it does feel like these ideas and themes are in this movie. And it's well executed. It's well done. And I have to say, this movie, if you have never seen it, I recommend it's on Disney Plus. Go watch it. I really like this idea, and I'm really glad that we got this movie. I mean, this movie could have, you know, never been made, and Tim Burton could have been sitting on this idea forever. Or he could have directed it, and it could have been a completely different movie and missed the point. Either way, I'm happy we got this movie. If I had to give it a grade, I would give it a solid B+. Thank you so much for watching.
Tim Burton's The Nightmare Before Christmas. Eureka! For the first time in high definition, only on Disney Blu-ray and on 2-disc Disney DVD. Coming this fall.